If I told you you could have 5 hours one-on-one with Steven Bartlett for £20, and in that time he was going to share a load of stories with you about his journey, he was going to give you some tools and techniques that he has used to help him be successful, and he's even going to talk you through how you could apply those to your own business and your own career, I think that's something you'd be interested in. And that's exactly what we can do with this. Steven Bartlett, Diary of a CEO, The 33 Laws for Business and Life. I love business books. They're really powerful resources. I like to think of it this way. Successful entrepreneurs have written down all of their thoughts, their ideas, their stories, what they learn, and the tools that they use to get there. You can then access those and read all about them anytime you like. Consider this. You'll never remember everything you learn in a business book or everything that you read, but what you can do is use that information to create a voice in your head. And that voice in your head can be a board advisor. So when you've got a problem to solve, you can go to that version in your head and you can say, what would Steven Bartlett, Steve Jobs, or Jeff Bezos do about this particular problem? That's a powerful business board right there. With that in mind, this is the start of a new series for this channel, Book Club. And we're starting today with Steven Bartlett's Diary of a CEO, The 33 Laws of Business and Life. In the past few years, Steven Bartlett has turned himself into one of the most recognisable business people in the UK. He seems to have come from nowhere, but now he's absolutely everywhere. Whether that's Dragon, author, podcast gold, soccer A player, it's hard to avoid the guy. The 33 Laws was an instant bestseller, and I'm really glad that I finally got around to reading it this week. As the name suggests, the book is divided into laws, which are basically life lessons. Each law has stories, techniques, and things that you can use to apply it to your own life and situation. The book is littered with these lovely quotes and sayings, which I think is really nice. Whilst no doubt you'll find value across all 33 laws, I'm going to focus on 3, which really stood out to me. Law 19, you must sweat the small stuff. Bartlett believes the success of his podcast, Diary of a CEO, has very little to do with his ability as a presenter. He says that he doesn't believe that he's inherently better than other presenters on other podcasts, but he thinks the success is down to the attention to detail that he and his team have given the podcast. Everything from the temperature of the room through to choosing the guest's favourite music and playing that for them before they come into the room so that they relax and it creates a good environment for a good chat. Details are everything to Bartlett. He talks about kaizens, which is a Japanese term that means continuous improvement, and one of the reasons that Toyota became one of the most efficient car manufacturers in the world. I first came across kaizens as part of a Six Sigma lean methodology, and it basically means that everyone in the company is responsible for improvements and that tiny little improvements all add up over time. It's about setting a standard of continuous incremental improvement. This idea that Bartlett talks about of sweat the small stuff really resonates with me because I've always found myself disproportionately focused on things that other people might say don't matter. Everything from a typeface on a website, messy cables under the desk, or through to the way that you might phrase something in your internal communications. Lots of people I have come across would say that these things don't matter and you shouldn't worry about those tiny details. But for me, it's different. I think it's a case of you're driving a stake in the ground and you're saying, actually, these things really matter. And we need to give a lot of thought to the detail because if we're good at the tiny stuff, we'll be great at the big stuff. It's about setting a standard. It's about saying that you don't do crap work. If you let these small details go, then what's to say that you don't let the big details go too? Sweat the small stuff, make sure everybody in the organization is part of continuous improvement and drive the right standard. That's powerful. Next up, Law 21, you must outfail the competition. Whenever an individual or a business decides that success has been achieved, progress stops. Law 21 in this book is in itself the reason to buy it. And a really good example of what I was saying before about how a mental version of Steven Bartlett as a board advisor might work. My interpretation of this law is that it's about complacency, speed of movement, incentives, and workplace culture. The book follows some great stories at Amazon, Booking.com, and an unnamed e-commerce giant, all about how experimentation is key and finding out what works and what doesn't work is critical for success. Running tests is the only way to find out what works. It's something that Bartlett talks about throughout the book and in other things I've seen him in, and it's clearly something he believes in passionately. likely a consequence of his marketing background. But running tests isn't necessarily as simple as it sounds. Firstly, everybody in the business needs to believe that everything can be better. This is quite hard culturally. Generally speaking, we are given pay rises and promotions for doing good work, so it can feel counterintuitive to go back to that same work and say it could be improved. It might almost feel like you're diminishing your past achievements, but that's not the case. You have to keep an open mind, and you have to understand that even good things can be better. This is where the right culture, values, and incentives are really important. You have to design an environment which rewards experimentation and makes sure people are not afraid to fail. There's an excellent story from Thomas J. Watson, the original president of IBM. In the story, an employee makes a mistake that cost the company $600,000. Watson's asked, "Are you going to fire this employee?" To which he responds, "No, I've just spent $600,000 training him. What you think the right packaging, typeface or logo might be, you might be right. You might have it spot on. You might know your customer better than they know themselves, and you know exactly what you want to do just by listening to your gut feel. But you might also be wrong. As a result, your conversion or your sales funnel may be working far worse than it could be. Constant improvement comes from constant experimentation. Constantly run tests, A/B test, trial and learn. That's what you should always be doing. Every piece of marketing, every interaction with the customer is an opportunity to test and learn. Law 29, create a cult mentality. Now, Bartlett is not actually talking about a cult with all of the negative things that go with a cult. He's talking about a cult-like mentality. He means create teams of people that really buy in to the ethos and vision of the business, and they're willing to defend it and go perhaps a bit further than they would ordinarily go as a result of that extreme belief in the vision of the business and where it's going. Bartlett talks about how your first 10 hires are really important because they each represent 10% of the culture. I'm not so sure about that, but it's an interesting idea. This law also quotes the great Steve Jobs, talking about how A players want to work with other A players. Talent likes to operate with talent. To be honest, this part of the book left me wanting a bit more. A lot of what Steven Bartlett says is correct, but culture is such a big subject in itself that trying to boil it down to a few bullet points that explain how to implement a culture just didn't seem quite right to me. I wanted to get more of an insight. He talks about how he's built 10 successful startups. That is amazing, 10 actual successful startups. I'd love to get some insight into how he made sure those teams were aligned, what he actually did to implement a culture, and how he knew that people were behaving a certain way out of values and culture and not just emulating what they thought he would want them to do. It's the one part of the book where I feel I'd like to hear more. My overall view of this book is that it's an easy read. It's well written, it's thought-provoking in places and funny in other places. There are lots of inspiring and attention-grabbing stories to enhance and illustrate his point. He's clearly a skilled marketeer, and his understanding of hook and narrative, combined with an easygoing style of prose, makes this an enjoyable read. This is a good book, you'll learn something from it, and enjoy it. As for Steven Bartlett himself, I'm in no doubt that we'll be seeing a lot more from him. See you on the next one.